Hey, what's up? Serena here from thriftdiving.com. So guess what? We are ready to start part 2 of the electrical wiring project. So if you remember part 1, which you can find up here in the corner and down below, I did 6 circuits for all the receptacles in my she shed. I didn't think that I would be able to do it, but I did. So you can watch that video. So I left off where we have 2 circuits left and it's all lighting, right? So I've got the lighting in the ceiling. I've got 10 recessed lights in the ceiling, and then I've got 6 exterior lights that are going to be on another circuit. Super excited to get this done. This week, the electrician comes who is overseeing everything that I do. So remember, I'm not just a DIYer tackling my own electrical. I'm actually under the advice of a master electrician. So everything that I'm doing has to be up to code. So it's nice to have somebody come and check and make sure that you're on the right track, which I am. All right, so are you ready? Because I'm ready. I'm ready to run some wires and get this baby done. Okay, now there's a lot of information in this video. I can't go through everything, but I'm gonna try. I've also included timestamps so you can jump around if you want. Okay, so getting started with this lighting, I'm using 14 gauge wiring. This is the 14-2, and I needed to get this wiring from the switch, which is right here by this door, over to that first blue X, which is the Ring security camera. But then I started realizing I've got a problem. I've got all these wires coming into this box, this 2-gang box. I don't think I have enough space. So there's something called box fill, which is where you actually have to count up how many conductors are in the box, how many devices are going to be here. So this is going to be for 2 switches. And if you don't have enough space, you have to get a bigger box. And so that's what I ended up having to do because I had 6 wires coming in. And by the time I added everything up, there was just not enough space. So later I did change this box out to a larger one. Over here at the side door, I've got a lot of cables going on, and this is one of the spots where it can get very confusing. Now this box is going to have a 3-way switch, so I'm using 14-3 wire, which means I've got 3 conductors in one of these cables. That's going to connect all the way to the switch that's over near the other door, because I want to be able to come in either the side door or the front door and operate these 4 can lights that are on this side of the room. So that's what I have to do, figure out how to get that wiring over to this switch and the other switch. I didn't know at the time, but you can't put 3 cables underneath one staple. You've got to use these stackers. So I'm going to take this staple out, replace it with this stacker, and I'm going to do another stacker up top. According to code, you have to have these stacked in the middle, and it has to be within 12 inches of the box. Generally, I've been placing these probably about 6 to 7 inches, which is fine. And the reason that they have to be in the middle is because when you're putting up drywall, if you're hanging pictures or doing any kind of, like nailing into your walls, you want to make sure that these are in the center and that they're not like out here where a nail or a screw could damage them. Now, everywhere that you see a blue X, that is either a Ring security camera or an exterior light. That is one circuit on its own. And that is pretty much done at this point. And then it was time to run the next circuit, which is for the recessed lights, and get it to those switches. Now, in order to do this, I needed to install some non-metallic push-in connectors. That protects the wires coming into this little junction box. And these are sort of like the receptacles. You're daisy chaining them together. And you've got one wire coming in, and then you've got another wire on the other side. And once those are stripped, you're going to have your blacks all together, stripped and put into those connectors. Just push it in all the way. You've got your neutrals, which is the white, and then you've got your grounds. So once that was done, I was ready to move on to the next step. All right, so I've got all of the lighting done. All the connections have been done, hoping that it was done properly. We'll find out on Thursday when the electrician comes. I'm a little nervous. I guess anytime you're drilling into your shed, I'm a little nervous, but I have a template and we are going to drill them out right now. These boxes are old work light boxes. For this one, we're using this template and we're going to put it right in between the studs. So I traced it out, did some pilot holes, and then cut it out with my jigsaw. I did make a little bit of a mistake because I was following the template exactly, and I ended up cutting some of these drilling some of these pilot holes, and I really didn't need to drill it precise to the template. So, I'm going to have to caulk around this, but not really a problem. I'm saying hi to you, throwing up the peace sign. I thought you'd appreciate that. Anyway, putting the box up, I knew that I was going to have to cut out and make some adjustments. I would much rather something be a little too small and then have to cut, than for it to be too big. Now these boxes are cool because you just slide them in there and they've got these little wings on them. So once you start tightening them up, once they're in place, you'll notice that the wings will start to get a little bit closer to the wall and grab it. That's how it's going to stay in place. And there's a couple other ways that you could install light boxes, but these are the ones that I chose and they're totally appropriate for this job. Okay, so for the ring lights, I bought 3 of them and I thought that these would be difficult to wire, but they're really not. They've got a ground wire, which is the green. They've got a neutral wire, which is white, and they've got a black wire, which is hot. And silly me, I started putting on the bracket and the supporting plate without even pulling the wires through. Thankfully, I didn't get too far and realized, oh, wait a minute, I need to actually feed the wires through. Ah, you know, sometimes DIY is so funny. Okay, so I pulled the wires through, stripped them, and then what I needed to do is connect the ground wires together. Because remember, I've got 2 sets of wires, one power in and power out. And those grounds have to be connected together. So I twisted them with my lineman's pliers, and then I cut them back a little bit and stripped the hots and the neutrals and then twisted those together as well, just the tips. But what I realized here is that my wires were way too long. And I think because I was a novice, I did something that most people don't do. I was so afraid my wires would be too short. So I left them extra long. And because I did that, the problem is that it was hard getting everything into the box. So by the 2nd and 3rd time, I realized, wait a minute, Serena, you need to make these wires a little shorter. So yeah, lesson learned. I placed wire nuts on all the spliced wires and then tried to shove everything as gently as I could back into the box. And again, because the wires were too long, it was a little difficult, but I learned by the 2nd and 3rd time. Now here's something funny. I actually was not supposed to put these up at this time because we hadn't had the inspection yet. And when you have a rough-in inspection, everything has to be open and visible for the inspector. When I realized my mistake, I had to go and take everything down, all the lights. So again, lesson learned. And you can see by the time I got to the 3rd light, I mean, these wires were short and it was so easy to stuff them back into the box. Now I do plan to go around to each of the ring lights and add a bead of caulk just around the top and the sides, leaving the bottom open. And honestly, my shed really didn't need porch lights because the ring lights are super bright, but these ones are more gentle. It's got an LED light. It matches the ones that are on the front of my house, and I just really like this style. So that's why I wanted them. And again, I made the same mistake installing them before the inspector came. When I realized my mistake, I had to go take it down. And the installation was pretty much similar to the Ring security cameras. So I used the same template. I fed the wires through, I stripped them. The black wires went with the black, the white went with the white, the grounds went with the ground, and it was pretty simple. The only thing that was a little different about this is that it had a ground wire that had to be wrapped around the little ground screw. And that wasn't the case with the Ring security cameras. Everything else was similar. So the grounds went with the grounds, the whites went with the whites, which are the neutrals, and the blacks went with the blacks, which is the hot. And once those all had wire nuts, then it fit back into the box pretty easily. I kind of learned my lesson at this point, and I wanted to make sure that this was nice and even. My electrician is fanatic when it comes to people not putting things on properly and straight and plumb. So I made sure I paid special attention to that. Now, my electrician had given me a job. He gave me homework. He said all of my wires have to be stripped and I have to make the little hooks on the end of the wires and connect all the grounds and do it properly because we're going to have an inspection. So that's what I did. So in this box, you see the wires on the left, that's the power coming in, and the wires on the right, that's the power leaving the box. This is going to be for a receptacle, an outlet. You'll see that I'm connecting the ground wires together, which have to be done in all your boxes. Now this little green wire nut is pretty cool because you can connect very easily your 2 ground wires, but still leave a long tail for connecting to the outlet, the device. Now I can tell you right here, these wires are way too long. Technically, you shouldn't have any more than 6 inches coming out of your box. And remember, all of these wires have to fit nice and neat inside that box, and your outlet, your device, has to fit in there. So these wires are way too long. 6 inches is what I should have aimed for. I did go back and cut them down, which I didn't show, but that's why I'm telling you, it's way too long. My electrician's like, yeah, I don't really come across people like you that often. Usually DIYers will cut them way too short. I figured shorter means I'm going to have to run some new wire. Longer, I can always snip them back. But this is what I was left with. I had to do this for each of the boxes because the inspector was coming for the rough inspection and everything had to be exposed. Even the exterior receptacles had to be stripped. And again, way too long. That's okay. I cut them back since recording this video. And keep in mind, this is going to be a weather resistant outlet right here, and it will have a protected cover over top of it. So the electrician came later that week. He said, my wiring looks good, just needed to cut them wires back. Okay, so we've got a 24-inch trench here that the landscapers had dug. Actually, they did 19 inches, and we're like, wait a minute, this has got to be 24 inches. So they came back and dug out a few more inches. And so many people on Facebook, electricians, just general men, said, no, you can't do this. It's got to be in conduit. This is wrong. This is illegal. This is against code. That's not true. According to the National Electrical Code, NEC, Table 300.5, you can have a trench 24 inches, and as long as you're using the appropriate cables, you can direct bury. But of course, check your local jurisdiction because it really depends on where you live. We ran into a little snag where the sub panel would not fit in between the studs. So we had to use a reciprocating saw or a sawzall in order to cut out just a little bit, about ½ an inch, so that the box would fit in there nice and snug. And then he used a hole saw to create a hole where those feeder wires are going to come up the wall into where that sub panel is going to be located. And if you don't know, this man is actually my residential wiring instructor from 2 years ago. I was enrolled in his class and COVID struck halfway through the class. So all the wiring that we were doing in the lab, all the things he was teaching us, all the connections that you see him doing right here, we didn't get a chance to do that in class. So the fact that he allowed me to do my own and gave me some professional hand holding to make sure that I did it right is amazing. And then he just charged me a small fee in order to do these connections. So I'm forever grateful to him for allowing me this experience to not just do my own, but to ask questions, to be able to film and show you how a professional does it and how a DIYer like myself was able to get this done under his advice. I also, when I was running my wires, had put in a 240 volt circuit receptacle that's going to be on the outside. So he cut the hole, put on the metal box, and this will allow me to expand in the future for whatever I may want to do outside. Now, because this is a metal box, that metal box has to be grounded. So the ground wire has to be wrapped around that green screw, the grounding screw first. For now, though, this will just be covered up with a metal plate, and I'll be able to keep it for future use. And now it was time for him to explain what in the world was going on with all these wires. What gets connected to what?
So that's 2 switches, right?
Okay.
So now, let me see. So the 3-way and the 2 lights, that was 1 circuit, correct? All right, so what we're gonna do is splice the neutrals, right? Because the neutrals just come in here through the 3-way and then it's gonna continue. All right, so the neutral's done. So these 2, right? Usually when I have 3-ways, just so I don't get them mixed up with the other blacks. Okay. Just do that, now you know they're together, right? So that's your travelers, and then this one is your switch leg that goes out to your lights, right? And then on this circuit, we'll tie all the neutrals together. All right, then we've got That says exterior light, so that's going to that, right? Okay, and what is this says?
That's going to the ring to your left.
Oh, this one goes out to that ring?
I think so.
And this one says in from something. Ring? Does that say ring?
Yeah, it's probably coming from that.
So this is our power supply.
Okay.
And that's our switch leg.
Yep.
Okay, so that should be pretty clear now, right?
Yes.
Ground's obvious.
Yep.
That goes to the three-way.
Yep.
That leaves the three-way.
Yep.
This is the one off the wire nut is the power supply to the switch, and this is the switch leg going out to that.
Going out, yep.
Okay? So you got that now.
Got it.
Here's what you can do with this one. When you put the new box in, bring all your cables in.
Okay.
Get all your grounds spliced.
Yep.
So these are two different circuits in here.
Correct.
So tie all these whites together, splice them together. Okay, and then remember all the grounds. So now you've got this one that says to other light and from ring. So this is your power supply.
Yep.
Right. So you're gonna splice this pigtail to the switch.
Okay.
And then for the exterior lights, and then that's going to go switch leg out to the exterior lights.
Okay.
Okay. This side, same thing. Splice all your neutrals together.
Yep.
Right. Get all those together, and then these two lights. Okay. So these two are your power supply.
Yep.
Right. Splice pigtail to the switch.
Okay.
And this one goes out, that's the switch leg going out to the cans.
Okay.
All right?
Yep.
So once you get the new box, that should be pretty clear.
So with his instruction, it was pretty clear. And so what was kind of confusing when I looked at all these wires suddenly made sense. Well, now it was time to move on to the next part of the project. So my interior work was done, and this time it was all him. So he needed to run this conduit up the back of the shed so that the feeder wires could go through into the sub panel. But there was a little bit of concrete sticking out at the bottom from the foundation. And in order to bypass that, thankfully I had a heat gun, and he was able to bend that just a little bit of an angle to bypass that concrete sticking out. So once that was done, it fit perfectly. And now it was just a matter of gluing everything together and then connecting it to the shed.
You gotta hold it together for about 10 seconds.
Okay.
Because if you put it together and you let go, what'll happen is you'll see it start to separate.
Oh, okay.
You hold it for about 10 or 15 seconds, and then it's not gonna go anywhere.
And let me tell you, that stuff stinks. That is the worst smell. And when you get it on your hands, it's nearly impossible to get it off of your hands. So if you're working around it, just be very careful. Make sure you're in a well-ventilated area and don't get it on your hands. I think Dawn's soap will work, but that's about it. Stop dropping it.
Yeah, never bring one screw when you're working next to a 2-foot deep trench. That should probably be a rule.
I think so.
Yeah, I'm not following my own advice here.
You know, I have to admit, it was a lot of fun working with him. He has a really funny sense of humor. Anyway, once all the wires were fed through the conduit, then he attached it to the wall, secured it, and then he came back on another day and we finished up some of those things that we started on this particular day. But remember, we weren't inspected yet, so we couldn't cover anything up. But we still needed to get everything done in time for the inspection, including the ground rods. These are 8-foot rods that if you are, let's say something happens to your shed, it's struck by lightning, this will create a pathway for the electricity to go into the ground. So there's 2 rods, at least 6 feet apart. And so he installed 2 of them, just using a hammer drill going into the ground. Then this will connect to the panel in some way. And I didn't record that part, but just know that's how it works and that's its purpose. And it has to be there for the inspection per code. Okay, so moving on the inside, this day it was time to pull these conductors through and make those connections. And I was on the outside pushing, holding it into place so that he could glue this.
Yeah, just hold it, push on it. Let's hold it for about 10 seconds and then it's done. It's holding, right? All right, looks good.
So is that which bar is that?
This is a ground bar.
That's the ground bar. And then is there a neutral bar? There's a neutral bar, right?
Neutral.
The neutral, okay.
So you know in a main panel, the grounds and the neutrals go in the same place.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. The
sub panel, they're different.
Okay.
Grounds go to ground bar, neutrals go to neutral bar.
Okay.
You have to keep them separate. Yeah, that's going to be your main breaker.
Okay. The main breaker.
You have to have a lot of big stuff in here to overload it.
Yeah, and I really don't think I'm going to have a lot of big stuff.
I mean, you could even run a welder in here if you wanted to.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. You never know where my DIY endeavors will take me.
You never know where you're headed. you might have like Lincoln Welding call you tomorrow. Hey, you want to send a welder?
Now, because I'm not an electrician, I'm not going to explain or walk you through how this panel was connected, but I'm going to leave this in here so in case you want to get a better look. He put a 70 amp breaker in there, and I know that I originally wanted 100, but as you just heard him say, there's more than enough power in here for the things that I'm going to want to do, and it does give me room to grow. So when people decide to do like DIY electrical, where are the places where they usually get it wrong? Like
sub-panels. A lot of times you'll open up a sub-panel, the grounds and the neutrals are all in the same thing. One of the big ones is they leave the wires too short. They think, you know, as long as it's sticking out of the box, that's all I need, and then you can't work with it.
Yeah.
That's a big one. That is almost a dead giveaway that this was done by an amateur. Almost every time.
Or that they're too long. Way too long.
Oh, they're way too long, but you almost never encounter that.
Really?
Yours could have been a first if I hadn't stepped in.
And I'm glad that he did step in. Now, I'm pointing out here that he actually wrapped one of the black feeder cables in red tape. And I asked him why he likes to do that, and he said it just lets people know that this is hot. So, I mean, whatever electricians do, they do. But he wrapped his, and that's what he did. He knows better than I do because I know nothing about what he's doing in the panel. And just a couple of notes here. Not everything was going to be connected at once. He knows that I need power to maybe at least one receptacle, and he knew that I needed lights. So he did strip a couple of the wires, and he was going to connect those for me. And before we went into the house, he also added a little bit of putty around that conduit going into where the sub panel is. So now that that's done, it's time to move on the inside of the house. He had to measure down how far in order to drill this hole to get the feeder wires into the house. So he cut the power on the exterior of the house, so there was no power coming into the house, and he cut some of the old cables away that he's not going to use, and then he realized there are some cables that are connected to this old original panel that we can still use for the new box. But he wanted to put it up out of the way and not disconnect it right away. But how can we get this thing up? So he's using some of this old wire and he's just wrapping it around there. And then he says the funniest thing to me.
What MacGyver was that, huh? Nice.
That was so funny. Okay, so the next thing was to drill a hole in the plywood that's there so that we can drill a hole into the concrete, into the foundation. So he used a hole saw, cut out a hole, and then he pulled out that big drill, the one that you saw with the ground rod, to drill the hole into the foundation.
Oh yeah! Woo!
Okay.
Just one.
So we stopped for that day, but in the meantime, the landscapers came back, filled the trench about 12 inches for the conduit. This is for the Ethernet. We don't have good Wi-Fi in the backyard, so the shed's going to have its own Ethernet, and I'll call Verizon, and they'll be able to pull some cables through that conduit. So I'll be able to do YouTube Live and get good reception, because you've seen how crappy my reception is before. What is that stuff called?
It's anti-oxidation paste. Because when aluminum oxidizes, aluminum oxide is created, and it does not conduct electricity. So it creates a little film that messes with the conductivity. That's why aluminum is dangerous potentially. Yeah.
I think at this point I was so tired, I was just ready to flip the switch and see lights in the shed. Now you see here that he's pulling the cable in. It's getting a little twisted on him, but he was able to straighten it out and then pull some of that sheathing back and make those connections. And I'm not sure why I didn't record the other connections that you see with the ground wires, those feeder wires that are coming in at the bottom. I don't know what happened with that footage, but it's got to be very similar to what you saw in the sub panel in the shed. So, okay, we didn't have that footage. That's okay. We can skip that. And this was funny too, because after he had installed the box, he's like, wait a minute, I still need to drill the hole for the conduit. So yeah, sometimes things are done backwards.
Man, look at that. Perfect. Just made it in the trench.
Good. So he finished the outside connections with all of the conduit. He glued it. And on another day, he actually came back to do the final connections at the sub panel in the shed. Now, this was the day that we were going to energize the shed. So we were only going to do 3 circuits and not connect everything else. Everything else needs to be connected once the drywall goes up. Because otherwise, if you try to connect everything and put plugs, outlets, you're just going to get mud all over them. So he just energized the 2 lighting circuits, the interior and exterior, and he gave me 1 circuit with 1 receptacle, 1 plug, 1 outlet. And if you notice at the bottom, remember he said that was where the ground wires go? So that's where he's putting the ground wires for the circuits that he's going to energize for me. Remember, we're just doing lighting right now, and we're doing 1 little receptacle. So right now he's just doing the overhead lights for the 10 recessed lights. So you'll notice the ground wire went in the bottom, the white neutral went into the neutral bar, and he's stripping the hot wire, and that's going into the breaker. Now, I'm not going to go through how I actually wired this 3-way switch. I will cover that in the next electrical video. But first, I've got to get drywall. I've got to do insulation and then drywall. And then we can do the switches and all the receptacles. Remember, we don't want to do all of this before the drywall goes up because it's going to get kind of muddy. And you don't want to destroy all of your outlets and your switches. But in order for the lights, the cans, and the ceiling to work, I needed switches. So we did wire those up really quick, and he actually wired a couple of them super quick for me. But let's do the final turning on.
Okay, you ready?
Oh my God.
Ta-da! You gotta flip this switch, turn these on.
Okay.
Look at that! It's like magic.
That is amazing.
All right.
I was so excited. Anyway, let's talk cost. So the fee for the electrician was $3,300. And remember, that was actually a lot less than what others were quoting me. I got quotes for $7,500, $8,500, and it didn't include nearly what I got out of this experience. Not just the money saving aspect, but the experience was just, it was invaluable. It was invaluable. So my cost for the ring lights, the Romex, the recessed lights, all of those things cost me an additional $2,500, let's say $2,600. So I did this entire project for about $5,900, which is still a fraction of what an electrician would have cost me. So I am so excited about this, and I learned so much. But you got to come back because insulation is in the shed, and I am ready to get started hopefully this week. So you're going to see that. So if you're new, subscribe so you can follow along. For all of you who've been following me in this journey, thank you so much. And a big thank you to John for this amazing project. I'll see you next video.